All right, let's jump right in. I want you to imagine something for a second. Picture you're in charge of a country, but it's not one big piece of land. Nope. It's a massive, sprawling collection of over 16,000 islands. The question is, how on earth do we even begin to govern a place like that?
I mean, seriously, just think about the scale of that challenge. For decades, this was the reality facing Indonesia. You had local governments all collecting really important information, but they had no way to share it with each other or with the central government in the capital. The source material has a perfect name for this problem: islands of information. It's a great metaphor, right? Every local government was basically its own little data island, completely cut off. So, if you're trying to coordinate something huge, like a response to a natural disaster or plan economic development across the whole country, well, good luck. Everyone was pretty much flying blind. To fix this, they had to find a way to build bridges between these islands. And that brings us to this idea of a spatial data infrastructure, or SDI for short. Now, that sounds super technical, I know, but the concept is actually pretty simple. The best way to think of it is like creating a common language for maps and all kinds of location-based data. An SDI lets a planning agency in one city see and use the exact same data as, say, a transportation department hundreds of miles away. It's the system that connects all those separate data islands into one single shared network.
It's a fantastic idea in theory, right? But here's the billion-dollar question. Were Indonesia's 514 local governments actually ready to build and use a system this complex? Nobody knew. So, for the very first time ever, a team of researchers launched a nationwide study to measure Indonesia's readiness from the ground up. So, how in the world do you measure something as big and complicated as readiness? Well, the researchers were smart about it. They broke it down into 5 key areas, what they called the essential pillars for any successful data infrastructure. And they looked at the whole shebang. You know, things like, is there an official policy and a budget for this stuff? Is there an actual team or department organized to manage the data? Do they have people with the right skills? Is the basic IT infrastructure, like internet access, even there? And finally, is the data itself actually available and in a format everyone can use? To get real answers, they created a 42-question survey and sent it out to every single local government. This slide gives you a little taste of what they asked. For example, under the policy pillar, they asked a simple question: do you have your own local regulation for this? A yes was a huge sign of commitment, so that got a high score. Under IT, they asked about something as fundamental as internet bandwidth. Again, simple but crucial. Every single answer helped build a detailed picture of what was really going on. Okay, so after collecting all this data from across the entire archipelago, the results started rolling in. And what they found was fascinating. It wasn't a picture of one country. It was a tale of 2 starkly different Indonesias. Let's start with the high end. The best score achieved by any local government was an impressive 84.11 out of 100. That's a great score. It shows that some places were absolutely on the right track. But then you have the lowest score. Get this, it was a 3.74. No, that's not a typo. 3.74. This wasn't just a small gap, this was a chasm, an enormous difference. And the national average, just 31.25. That number right there confirmed it. The vast majority of the country was nowhere near ready. It revealed a massive, and I mean massive, digital divide. And this slide just perfectly illustrates where that divide was. The top score, that 84.11, came from a place called Depok City, a modern, well-funded city right next to the capital, Jakarta. And the lowest score? That came from a remote regency made up of 20 tiny islands, almost 2,400 kilometers away. It became crystal clear that location and resources were everything. And this wasn't just about a couple of extreme cases. It was a clear pattern across the board. When the researchers grouped all the cities together and compared them against the more rural regencies, the trend was undeniable. The cities, with more money, smaller areas to worry about, and just more access to technology, were consistently way more prepared. But here's where the study found something really surprising. The biggest problem wasn't what you might expect. It wasn't a lack of data. In fact, almost 2/3 of local governments already had the geographic data they needed. The real problem was institutional. Only about 30% had a dedicated team whose job it was to actually manage, share, and use that data. It's like they had all the puzzle pieces sitting in a box, but almost nobody was assigned to actually put the puzzle together. So, okay,
The study uncovered some pretty major weaknesses. But what makes this whole story so cool is what happened next. This research didn't just end up in a report that sat on a shelf gathering dust. No way. It became a real catalyst for action.
The report laid out the main problems with brutal honesty. The national policy wasn't being put into practice. Only 7% were doing it. The institutional structures, those dedicated teams we talked about, were mostly missing. And maybe the biggest hurdle of all, there was a fundamental lack of awareness among local leaders about why this data stuff was so incredibly important for their people.
And here is the brilliant part. The national government took these findings, and instead of punishing the low performers, they used them to inspire everyone. They created something called the Bu Mandala Award. It's an annual prize given to the local governments that do the best job developing their data infrastructure. Suddenly, the assessment wasn't a scary report card anymore. It was a competition. It created a race to the top, giving everyone a real incentive to get better. At the end of the day, the story of Indonesia's journey is a powerful reminder of a challenge that every country faces. It forces us to ask a really critical question, one that applies way beyond these 16,000 islands. As we build these amazing new digital systems, who are we leaving behind? Who's stuck on those remote islands? And what are we really doing to bring them along for the ride?